So good evening, everyone. I'm Natasha Lance. I'm the COO of the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. Welcome to our first Spotlight on Health with CNS webinar. We plan to offer these webinars on a variety of timely topics related to whole food plant-based nutrition. And tonight's topic is childhood obesity. It's not just in their genes. We're so glad that you're here this evening. Make yourselves at home. Please post your questions in the chat once it is working, which it should be very soon. And CNS Medical Advisory Board Coordinator and Physician Assistant Renee Saka. Renee, if you want to raise your hand there. She will be collecting questions to be answered at the top of the hour. So please stay for the Q&A if you're able to, and if not, you will receive the Q&A in the replay within a couple of days. So as far as additional housekeeping, we're going to keep it very short this evening. I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike Holly, who will be our host this evening. You may recognize Dr. Holly from his role in the film Eating You Alive, where he also served as the medical consultant. Michael C. Holly, MD, is a practicing physician board certified in asthma, allergy, and immunology. He received his undergraduate degree from the College of Idaho. Dr. Holly attended Loma Linda University of Medicine in Loma Linda, California, and received his medical degree in 1985. He currently practices with the Allergy and Asthma Group of Galen in Chattanooga, Tennessee area. Dr. Holly is a member of the teaching faculty at the University of Tennessee College of Medicine, Chattanooga unit. He is a member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and is a fellow of the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology and the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. Dr. Holly is the speaker for Dinner with a Doctor, that's DWTD, an instructional program developed to educate people about how to implement a whole food plant-based approach for treating, preventing, and reversing disease. Dr. Holly has served as a board member for the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies and is currently the chairman of our medical advisory board. Dr. Holly and his wife, Cindy Ford Holly, MD, have 2 adult sons, and the entire family embraces a whole food approach to eating and health. Thank you so much for your contribution to CNS, Mike, and I'm going to hand it over to you so that you can introduce our panelists for the evening. And at this time, Renee and I and Allison will be going behind the scenes.
We'll miss you, but you'll come back. Thank you, Natasha. It's a real privilege to be here with our first Spotlight on Health with CNS, sponsored by the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. As Natasha mentioned, our topic for tonight, childhood obesity. It is not just in their genes. And we have 3 wonderful, esteemed panelists tonight to share some insight, knowledge, and thoughts on this problem. First, Dr. Lee Ettinger. He has been a pediatric kidney specialist since 2004, and he didn't learn about whole food plant-based nutrition until 2014. Changes in his own eating yielded great results, and he started to share the scientific evidence of the health benefits of the plant-based diet with his patients, community groups, nurses, and other doctors. He earned the E. Cornell certificate in plant-based nutrition in 2016. In 2017, he joined the staff of his hospital's pediatric weight management program with the goal of addressing the pediatric obesity epidemic with the plant-based diet. In 2019, he became a diplomat of the American Board of Obesity Medicine. In 2021, he founded the Dr. Herbivore telemedicine practice, which offers personalized plant-based guidance for families throughout the New York and New Jersey area, as well as e-courses for others. Dr. Ettinger enjoys helping families successfully change course to a plant-strong path for their health, for animals, for social justice, and for the environment. Welcome, Dr. Ettinger.
Thank you very much for that.
Great. That's
Thank you.
okay. Timmerie Hagenberger is also known as the nutrition professor. She's a registered and licensed dietitian nutritionist, certified exercise physiologist with a master's degree in public health and over 20 years of experience as a nutrition professor. She's a senior public health nutritionist with the state of Florida. She's a speaker, media personality, author, and also works with private clients and in corporate wellness, specializing in plant-based nutrition. She also manages her resource-rich website, thenutritionprofessor.com. She's contributed to several cookbooks and published her very own, very unique cookbook known as The Foodie Bar Way: One Meal, Lots of Options, Everyone's Happy. And I'll just plug in right there. I have that book. My wife and I, we gave it away, a whole case of them at our Dinner with a Doctor programs. It's an excellent book. It's a practical and engaging resource for families and individuals that are transitioning to and maintaining this health-promoting eating pattern. Timmerie is also the founder of an incredible online membership community, the Foodie Bar Way of Life, that brings her cookbook and joyful approach to life and makes loving food and living a life that loves us back simple, satisfied, sustainable, and fun. Welcome, Timmerie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Meryl Fury has been a public health nurse for 30 years, specializing in leadership and supporting the health of vulnerable populations. She climbed the ranks in federally qualified health centers before retiring to follow her true calling in food as medicine. She is certified in plant-based nutrition by the eCornell certificate program and studies the use of whole plant foods for health. Meryl is the president and CEO of Plant-Based Nutrition Movement, a nonprofit in the Chicagoland area, where the focus is educating our most at-risk populations about the life-saving benefits of diet and nutrition. Meryl is on the Advisory Council for Plant Pure Communities, Board of Directors for eCornell T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies, a Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine Food for Life instructor, and a member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. She presents regularly to groups seeking information on healthy eating patterns. Meryl has founded and leads the 6 Million Seeds Child Nutrition Project and podcast, an initiative to address the gross inadequacies in the way we feed children and to decrease the impact that the standard American diet has on the health of the planet. Welcome, Meryl. Great to have you here.
Happy to be here.
So, some of you may be familiar with the American Academy of Pediatrics and their recent published statement on and guidance on what to do about childhood obesity. This is the first real guidance that they put out ever, really. It's the second time they put out a statement. The statement 15 years ago was really just watchful waiting, not a lot of guidance there. But now this is a lengthy guideline, and I just want to read you their introductory lines. They say that the current and long-term health of over 14 million children and adolescents is affected by obesity, making it one of the most common pediatric chronic diseases. Obesity has long been stigmatized as a reversible consequence of personal choices, but has in reality complex genetic, physiologic, socioeconomic, and environmental contributors. So let's start our discussion. Dr. Ettinger, can you share with us a bit of how you see the extent and the scope of this issue in children today?
Right. Thanks a lot for the kind introduction, and thank you to CNS for inviting me to this panel. Very important topic. Yes, as the American Academy of Pediatrics said, it's a concerning problem. 14 million children in this country. That's estimated to be about 20% of the pediatric population. And obesity is defined as the top 5% of people's body mass index, the kids' body mass index. So it might seem strange to say, well, 20% of the kids' population have what 5% of the population should have, but that 5% of the population was based on growth curves from the 60s. And so it just goes to show that when we're today's children from how obesity epidemic has grown.
Thank you, Dr. Ettinger. Meryl, Timmerie, any comments there?
You know, I would add that in the 30 years of me being a public health nurse, I only saw the obesity problem increasingly, I can't, there's no other way to say it, just gain. It gained over those years, right? So even as far back as the 70s and the 80s, kids weren't heavy like they are now. And in vulnerable populations, it has increased exponentially since that time. So it is, it's a desperate situation. I really count it as dire, the way that our children are being managed right now. And it starts at home, it's in schools, it's everywhere. And it has a lot to do with just our lack of understanding and the environments that our children are growing up in now.
And I also noticed in the AAP guidance, those numbers were based on the 2017, 2018. We have more updated numbers and they're not any better. They're much worse. And the impact of COVID shutdowns and schools and online learning, and it really took, especially that 5 years old to 12-year-old, where, and even a little bit older, where they don't have the ability to go off with their friends on their own. They're really stuck in their house. So many of those changes have really scary consequences that were not captured in that AAP guidance yet. Well, it needs to be amended because those numbers have changed so dramatically in such a short amount of time. And even in my watching 20 years of college students, yeah, obviously they're a little bit older than our, preteens and, the childhood piece, but seeing them show up to me at 18 already on blood pressure meds, already, in the 300s or more with weight we definitely, that was more of an anomaly. And now, yeah. And I remember going to a continuing education seminar for dietitians that was put on by a pediatrician at UC Davis Med Center. And this was easily 15 years ago, probably a little more. And he had shown a picture of 3 kids to the audience, which was, again, all dietitians, and said, which is the overweight child? And the one child in the center was clearly overweight. And he said, actually, it's all of them. And that's the problem, is that when the norm changes, then you find, the parents say, well, they're not the littlest kid in their class, but they're definitely not the biggest. And it normalizes this unhealthy environment and just kind of we all, nothing means anything unless we have something to compare it to. So that makes it a very slippery slope.
Right. Well, let's take a few minutes and chat about what are the causes, the risk factors, modifiable risk factors. What are the things that you all see as the contributing factors for this, I'm going to use the word epidemic, pandemic that we're experiencing in childhood obesity?
Are you gonna
Go ahead,
Colin?
Dr. Ettinger. Go ahead.
Shall I go first? I went first last time. Meryl, you can go first this time.
One thing that I see, and I'll go from the public health point of view, that's going to be the position I'm going to advocate from all this this evening. In low-income populations and where the neighborhoods are seriously challenged, we have whole zip codes of children who eat poorly in a lot of cases. There is limited access to healthy food. There is limited ability for the parents just to give the children the basics of everyday life. And actually, there's a book that's come out recently called How the Other Half Eats, which is really talking about this very thing, about how when a family is in a socioeconomic, I'll call it a distress situation, minimal resources, there's a lot of desire to do the same thing that other parents do, give their children what they want, say yes to little treats, take them to certain functions and events and stuff. And when the parents don't have the capacity financially to say yes to everything the kid is asking for, they were more likely to say yes to snacks and treats and little, sweets and candies, because that they can afford. And it does allow them to say yes to what the child is asking for. So in an environment where there is limited access to healthy food and more than enough opportunity for the parent to say, no, you can't do such and such a thing, these children wind up getting more and more of unhealthy foods, right? Also in those environments where the stressors are high, there might be a little bit more chaos in the family. There might be more chaos in the neighborhood environments, loss of parents, things like that. We know that those trigger certain coping mechanisms. And that's a whole nother conversation about genetics and epigenetics. Maybe we'll get into that. But those trigger certain behaviors, right? And those children may be using food for coping and self-consoling and things like that. I think that those are aspects of nutrition and eating patterns that people don't, or we have not up till now spent any amount of time really paying attention to. There's also the whole issue with what happens if you're a stigmatized population, if there's racism that you're dealing with every day, if you're a new immigrant, if you're any of those things, make it very difficult for the child. And if the parent is feeling like I have to do something to console my little one, and Doritos are a quick fix, okay, then it's Doritos or it's hot Cheetos or it's whatever it is. Right? There.
And we also recognize that those foods were engineered to hit that bliss point while also being, I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with the term disappearing calories, because you basically don't even need to chew them. They just dissolve in your mouth, which means you don't eat and feel, oh my gosh, I'm so satiated. I feel like no, you could down thousands, and people do, of calories and still feel hungry. Your body is searching for nutrients, but also we know quite from the research well established that we tend to eat the same weight in food. So if we're eating food that is super calorically dense, but very light, the joke of you open a bag of chips and you look to see what happened, where are they? And they're super light. You eat that bag and it's more than 1,000 calories. You could never do that in potatoes. You would stop, before you would just be physically so uncomfortable. And Meryl, I really appreciate what you were saying about the treats, and trying to do something for the child, saying yes. And that was highly emphasized during COVID when everything was no. You can't even go, we can't do anything we used to be able to do. So, parents looking for any way to say, yes, make you happy. And you have that happen with this crazy invasive food marketing that's targeted. And yes, they were home. And so they were home on their tablets and phones and all, with all those, all the marketing pieces, from the little almost invisible soda can in the, not even, all of that marketing in movies and TV, and even the placement of products that weren't straight out ads, that it's just everywhere. And so that combination really turned into a hot mess. And to add a different piece to it, I was very concerned 20 years ago when I was seeing students who literally had no cooking skills whatsoever. And the really scary part was they had no confidence that they could even do it. They would just come to me and say, that commercial where they say you can't boil water, then you should come to Carl's Jr. That's me. I wouldn't be able to survive. And I think, oh, but they're not even willing to try because they didn't come from any example of that, because they're once removed. A lot of us, our parents cooked, but their parents didn't. And so you have too many generations that go down the Pop-Tart route for breakfast, and they can't, it's not even a reality for them. It doesn't ever even occur to them. So that's a couple other things.
Well, I don't actually consider obesity a disease. A disease implies that the body has got something wrong with it, that there's something amiss. But obesity is actually the body doing the right thing. The situation we evolved in 100,000 years ago, calories were very scarce, so it made sense for us to store extra calories as fat to survive the upcoming famine or winter. And the problem is we're in a situation of evolutionary mismatch where we have this mechanism where our senses have evolved to seek out calories, and our pleasure centers of our brain reward us with good feelings when we find something that's highly caloric, all because these would help us survive 100,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago. But now we're in a situation where the calories are abundant and our lives are much more sedentary than they were. So our mechanisms that helped us survive in the past have now become problematic, that we're storing all these extra calories for an upcoming famine that isn't coming. So that's the situation. And the people's reaction to this American Academy of Pediatrics was, oh, the system has failed. Now we have to do medicines for surgery and surgeries on children with obesity. And I'm thinking, no, the system is getting the exact results it was designed to do. We have people who want calories, and we have a $5 trillion food industry that wants to give us highly palatable, highly caloric foods, school lunches, which are not nutritious at all. And as was mentioned, the social determinants of health and the marketing, it's just a system that's getting the exact results it was designed for, unfortunately.
And we knew this was coming. It's just hitting the fan. I mean, we could all see it happening, more and more out there. And something to mention too is the idea about the sweetened drinks, that we went from, that is definitely a risk factor. And, we went from Gatorade actually being designed for the Florida Gators to replace urine. And I mean, it was designed to taste like urine because that's what you need to replenish your, and now I would joke and say, so from the parking lot to our classroom, it's not an endurance event. You don't need an energy drink or, an electrolyte laden sweetened drink to get from there to here. But, oh, I don't like water, is what you'd hear. And it's just one after another. But again, it's that bliss point. The sad thing is that it's a catch-22 because you should be able to resist these foods, but this is treats. It's like, wait a second, we have to redefine what treat means. And Meryl, you hit on that. It's like, how can we redefine? And that's more of a solution based piece, but.
Yeah.
I would consider Gatorade a light drink as to what the kids are drinking these days with all the sugar and caffeine and stuff. Gatorade is almost like the gateway drink to these other energy drinks that are out there these days. As you said, we saw it coming almost.
And so for all three of you, what are some of the long-term health consequences that you're seeing that we probably weren't seeing? There's several come to my mind that we weren't seeing, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. What sort of things are you all seeing that are affecting our children today?
I'll jump in. The first one, I've been looking at the microbiome lately, and this highly caloric, highly processed, meat-centric, and low-quality diet that our kids are eating is causing dysbiosis. The microbiome of the gut is totally getting skewed toward organisms that are more likely to cause illness, more likely to lead toward obesity, more likely to become dysregulated. That's one of the things that we never talked about before because microbiome wasn't even a thing, but now it is. And of course, the obvious one is the what used to be adult onset diabetes has now been renamed as type 2 because it's found in children.
And I don't want to leave the microbiome for a second, because the first thing I thought of was the link between mood and anxiety and microbiome. And I am seeing a ridiculous amount of children with depression and anxiety, and now on the spectrum and it's something to really consider, that because then it becomes even more of this child is so uncomfortable, and you self-medicate with more, and it just makes it worse and worse and worse. And this isn't something new, but it's just so prevalent that it's almost, I think a big change that I have seen is just the frequency. When I was little, we would go out once, maybe a month. I mean, it was just like a big deal and what have you. And I had students who'd watch Super Size Me and say, oh, that's so dumb. McDonald's 3 times a day. I mean, that's ridiculous. They'd kind of blow it off. And I look at their diet study and I'd say, well, you had McDonald's for breakfast, Taco Bell for lunch, and In-N-Out for dinner. So it's not that far off from what you're doing, and that wasn't even questioned. And I would just think, how do you do? And then coffee drinks that are dessert in between. And you just think at some point, this has to have an impact. Youth can only take you so far. And it did, because I saw the kids with diabetes. I saw the high blood pressure, like I mentioned, 12 years old on adult blood pressure meds.
Yeah.
At what point? And now colon cancer. I saw someone come in 25 years old with a colostomy bag.
Yeah, that's dramatic. So as a pediatric nephrologist, kidney doctor for 16 years at a major medical center, I saw a lot of pediatric hypertension, because the local pediatricians, if they had a patient in their child check or in their clinic with a concern about high blood pressure, they would refer to me, because often that can be a sign of a kidney problem in a child. But I would rule out a kidney problem, rule out a heart problem, rule out a hormone problem, and then I'd be sitting there with a child with an elevated BMI, with a family with an elevated BMI. And then initially, I was always talking about salt, but once I learned about the plant-based diet and the benefits for lowering blood pressure, I would start to get families and kids on the plant-based diet, or at least eating more plant-based, and had some good successes there, even getting kids off of blood pressure medicine, or not having to start blood pressure medicine as they made those diet and lifestyle changes. And that was very rewarding for me.
Yeah, children are, as you all know, they're very resilient, and so their bodies can tolerate a lot. But what we're seeing now is they're surpassing that threshold of tolerance and resiliency. And as you all point out, we're seeing type 2 diabetes, which is very difficult to treat, oftentimes in children, in addition to hypertension and cardiovascular disease. And Timur, you mentioned cancer as well. So this is a problem that is not going away. And as you all have mentioned, it's on the upswing. So talk to me about, what are some of the ways that we can empower our parents? Because, Meryl, you mentioned something at the beginning. You talked about how it starts at home, or a lot of it has to do with home. Seen in the chat box, a lot of kids will eat what their parents eat. What are some of the ways, what are solutions that we can start to try to at least make a dent in this problem?
I was sitting here all day sort of prepping for this conversation in between everything else I was doing, right? This is it's quite a topic.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that we could do that we're not doing. I'll tell you just 2 things. One is the guidance that came out from the American Academy of Pediatrics is doing exactly the same thing that American medicine is known for, which is we're watching a flood and we are grabbing a mop and some rags and trying to stop the flood, mop up the flood without turning off the water source. That's the first thing. If we thought that child health was important, like really important, we would do something about it. We know how to do that. We have amazing skills, right? So for example, and this is what actually got us started on our child nutrition project, 6 million seeds, right? It was during the pandemic, and there was a great push to get everyone vaccinated. And there was nobody in the country knew anything about these vaccinations. These vaccines did not exist, right? And there was a large number of the population, large segment, that was not interested in vaccines, correct? But within the space of about a year and a half, a large segment of that same population did take vaccines. And it had a lot to do with the importance that we placed on it. We had movie stars, TV personalities, athletes. We had it all over Facebook. We had it on every billboard. You couldn't open a media platform of any kind that you wouldn't get hit with an ad for getting your vaccines within 3 minutes of opening the platform. If we wanted it to be important, we would do that, right? Now, as far as what happens at home, it would include teaching parents and whole families and having it come across the television, have it come across every media platform, that child nutrition is important. It's important. We don't sell our children down the river to the highest bidder for their health, you know? I think that would be a huge thing. If we thought it was as important as we think football is important, we would treat it differently.
Yeah, I like that, Meryl. I think you're really onto it. I mean, COVID was important and was killing a lot of people. Well, guess what? So is childhood disease and childhood obesity, and they are, as we say, the future, right? And so I like that, making children a priority, making their nutrition a priority, just like we do other things. And the football analogy is a good one. Yeah, yeah. Dr. Ettinger, Timmery?
I was disappointed with the American Academy of Pediatrics. I don't think it went far enough. On one hand, yes, they did recommend medicine and surgery for childhood obesity, but it's a situation where if you give someone a hammer, every problem becomes a nail, in that this is what doctors do, prescribe medicines and do surgeries. So I understand them wanting to promote that approach, but their wording and their guidance about the diet and lifestyle was very weak. There was no real clear guidance. It said we want a nutrition education, more physical education. There was some references to a non-diet kind of lifestyle change, but it never really specified what this nutritional intervention should be, short of decreasing sugar sweetened beverages and encouraging more physical activity. I actually had the opportunity to speak with one of the authors of the guidelines, and I asked her, I said, well, you know, pediatricians have been giving this advice since I can remember in the 80s, being a kid in the 80s, drink less soda and exercise more. Why does the AAP think now that this guidance is going to be different? What's different this time? And she said, well, you know, pediatrician might have said that once a year at a well child check, but what now they're recommending is more frequent interventions, even as much as 26 times per year, bringing a child in to a program to really emphasize these points. But I don't know if more of what didn't work is going to work, but I'm not hopeful. I was hopeful that they would give more plant-based guidance, for example, or some evidence-based recommendation, but they didn't. So that was disappointing to me.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot that we can do. And it is going to have to be multi-pronged, because this is a problem that didn't happen overnight, but it's being complicated by a lot of really simple things like sleep. Sleep has not come up yet. But one of the issues that I saw when my students went online was they didn't really know what day or night was anymore. They would sleep in the morning, and then they'd be up at night, and they'd be on their devices, and everything was from their bed. And so, you know, even with my own kids, I was like, okay, you guys, wait, no, you're going to confuse your body. What's the bed for? What's, you know, like, you need to separate this. But I had so many that would just log in when they're, you know, horizontal. And so sleep is a huge issue, and that brings it back to the microbiome. And then that brings it back to the hormones that help us feel full and satisfied, and those that keep us eating. So sleep is one thing, and that's something that we can as parents, we can say no devices in the rooms past a certain time. I mean, at some point we have to set kind of some of those limits. And that was even brought up in those AAP guidelines. They had said family organization was one of the risk factors. Families that had less organized routines and limit setting had a higher chance of having kids with obesity. So something along those lines that may not even be something you would normally think about. I also think that we need to engage parents in a positive way, because of course, this is one of those circumstances where it's very easy to say, look at all the things that are going wrong and look what's happened. And now look at this child, but don't shame them. But I mean, it's just a mess. And so to start the conversations with, what does being healthy, what would it even look like? What do you want to create in your family? Because I'll have a lot of clients that will say, well, I mean, they don't eat that bad during the week, but then on the weekend, of course, we do French fries and da da da. And it's like, okay, is that the kind of, like, do you want your child to make their cells from hot Cheetos and French fries? And because unless they're on total parenteral nutrition, everything you eat is how you make your body cells. And so, but thinking about it in that way where they may have just accepted the after feeling or after dinner feeling of exhausted, bloated, in pain, stomach ache, headache. That's just normal. And they maybe don't realize that food is supposed to make them feel energized. When you're done eating, you should be ready to move and live and not just ready to fall asleep. But I think we're dealing with two levels at least, and some families more than that, where the parents' reality is they cope with food. They don't get the exercise. They don't do the cooking. Their normal feeling is just kind of meh, right? That's a new, in the vocabulary now, it's this MEH, meh feeling. I had students who changed their diet to plant-based, and it was so cute. I had someone that came to me and he said, I don't know what's going on. And I said, what do you mean? He said, it's weird. Like, I feel like volunteering. And so now I started to volunteer at this organization. This is like not me. And I thought, okay, but it's crazy how it really does impact your mood and your mental status. But you have to also think about if these families are stressed and, you know, they've got all of these toxic stress isn't something that Meryl talked about a little bit, but that impacts as well, you know, the risks. So meeting the families where they are and just saying, what would a day where you felt good, what does that feel like? What kind of goals do you want for your family as far as health wise? And because people know that hot dogs aren't good for you, but they just kind of think of the next decision. But I got to feed the kids. And then inviting them with very simple ideas that are economical. And that's what's so amazing about plant-based is this is also the most economical way. If you actually do whole food plant-based, this is the most economical way to eat. All day long, I have a drawer with lentils in them and I pick the lentils up. Do you know what these are? Yeah. And I'll explain and I'll say $1.52, 8 servings. You try to do that at a grocery store. Or at a fast food restaurant, because nobody spends 69 cents at Taco Bell. It just doesn't happen. So inviting them to experiment and try really easy recipes. And I have, obviously a lot more as far as ideas go in that direction, but just a few.
Yeah, so those are all excellent points. I like the, meet them where they're at. And my observation has been that when you can get the kids on board and when they bring ideas home and they're bugging the parents about this or the other, it's going to have some sort of impact. And so, a lot of places to start. I like Meryl's, when you talked about schools and school programs, that's really, really important. I did a dinner with a doctor program a couple of nights ago, and a parent came up to me and said, my son came home and said, I want to be plant-based. And they have no idea where he got that, but they were going to jump in with him. And so, yeah, those are things that we need to move toward, and realizing that, you know, as Tim Marie was saying, we can't preach to them, so to speak, but yeah, what does this look like to you? Getting them actively involved, getting the kids actively involved. I've heard a lot of you mention, or not here tonight, but mention getting the kids involved in cooking, that can be kind of a fun thing to do. And
Huge.
and you know, I'll plug your book again, Tim Marie. The Foodie Bar is an excellent way, because it's simple and it allows kids to have some input to what they're eating, and it's stuff they can fix. It's not complicated recipes, that sort of thing. So,
And something I want to add that's really important is that we are not linked to our food. Most kids don't know where the food came from. And that was brought up, you know, Jamie Oliver did that thing, you know, where they hold up, you know, a tomato and they don't know what that is, but they know what ketchup is, and they know, you know, so you see the wonderful work that they're doing in New York. What is the gentleman's name? He did all the tower gardens in the public school. I have his book, but showed that an inner city school could grow thousands of pounds of produce in these tower gardens inside. And the kids were just lit up. They couldn't wait to try. And so really bringing them back to food grows from the, you know, in the ground from plants, and bringing them back to that. I think bringing nutrition and all of that into the curriculum. I don't think we should be doing math problems about cases of soda. I think it should be bushels of carrots. And, you know, I mean, I think we can really roll that in, because the seeds grow the food, which nourish the body, and Meryl's seeds. But I think we've lost that completely. And I want to plug for breastfeeding. So at WIC, we actually see there are studies that link longer duration of breastfeeding, lower childhood obesity, stopping breastfeeding before 6 months, higher risk of obesity. And then I'll say a few other things about WIC in a minute if you want to hear, because we actually have seen numbers go down for obesity in WIC from 2010 to 2020. I haven't seen them beyond that, but there was actually research that showed they went down. And I have a couple ideas about why that might have been.
okay. Dr. Ettinger, I'm interested to hear what you, as a busy pediatrician, nephrologist, obesity doctor, what kind of things are you doing in your clinic that you find have been successful in getting people on the right path?
Well, I like the plant-based diet because it teaches self-efficacy to a child, even a young child. So self-efficacy is the confidence to make the healthier food choice in a social situation or an emotional situation. So what I like about the plant-based diet is you draw a line and say, I'm not going to eat animal products. So all of a sudden, in a social situation, it's a lot easier to make the healthier plant-based choice. You're not tempted by those animal-based products, which have a lot higher calorie density and come with the saturated fat and cholesterol and things like that. So it's easy to draw the line, make a decision, you're going to be plant-based, and the social situations, hopefully once you've gotten used to the dealing with the pressures and the questions from other people, become much more manageable. So that's a way of teaching self-efficacy to a child. And then the emotional situations are when someone's stressed or anxious or upset and wants to reach for the higher calorie density food. I like to teach disenchantment. So I think about how enchanting a rose is. It smells nice and reminds us of love and Valentine's Day. So you might want to reach out and grab the rose, but it has thorns underneath it. You might get stuck by the thorn. So someone who's grabbing a rose might pause and say, oh, I don't want to get stuck by the thorn. It's the same when you're thinking, when you're stressed and feeling like you need something to boost you up, some high calorie treat, and that treat is very enchanting. But if we take a moment and pause, if it's an animal product like bacon or something like that, and thinking about whatever animal welfare issue or environmental issue that comes to mind about that animal product, then we can become disenchanted. Or if it's like a cupcake that is not plant-based, again, drawing that line with what's plant-based and what's not can help us become disenchanted and improve our self-efficacy in those emotional situations when we're reaching for something to soothe us, high-calorie snacks or things like that. So that's what I'm really trying to help families and kids and even younger kids understand. The role of the plant-based diet can help with this difficult situations that we want to eat unhealthy foods.
Dr. Edinger, I want to add something to what you had said. I really love that analogy.
Mhm.
And one thing that I always try to get people to think about is their language. So when I hear someone say, oh, yeah, it's regular milk, I say, no, that's cow's milk.
Mhm.
Like, even though that seems really simple, I had an interaction with someone and I said, well, is it, do you know, is it cow's milk? And the person was probably 21. They were working at a coffee place and they said, well, what are you talking about, cow? It's regular milk. And I said, well, I mean, there's almond milk and soy milk. I don't know what you're talking about, lady. It's just regular milk. And so really calling it for what it is, instead of we rename these foods to make them seem less of what they really are. And as I was saying, linking plants, the growth of plants and our growth, but also, like you said, see it for what it is. Bacon, it may be called bacon, but it is pig flesh, a little pig that was, and without having to get into, the horrendous factory farm footage, kids know they don't want to hurt other beings. I mean, if anything, they're the ones who say, no, I would do it for the animals more than. They don't have the health piece, but they do have that compassion piece.
Yeah.
So that's critical that they understand what their food really is.
Yeah, good point. And I'd also add calling something fake meat or fake milk or fake cheese or something like that, again, belittles or demeans that product, that plant-based product. It kind of puts up the animal-based product and makes you think less of the plant-based product. So please, call those products what they are. They're plant-based cheeses and plant-based meats. There's, discussions whether those are healthier or not. They're healthier alternatives. Not whole foods plant-based, but let's give them the respect they deserve.
Right. And, one area we haven't touched on, and I'm just going to very briefly touch on it, is physical activity. With my adult patients, whenever I say, I noticed you've put on some weight or whatever, they'll say, oh, well, I hurt my knee, I hurt my ankle, I can't be physically active. What I see with children, and you all can tell me if you see differently, but I see children active in a lot of activities. They're in softball, baseball, basketball, football, soccer, you name it. But they're coming off the field drinking that Gatorade that Tim Marie talked about, and then they go to McDonald's afterwards. And so whatever energy they put out on the sports field gets offset by the poor diet. And so, activity is great, but it's certainly not the panacea for this childhood obesity epidemic that we're dealing with. I want to switch just a little bit. Meryl, you brought up epigenetics earlier, and I want to give you an opportunity to kind of touch on that a bit and open the discussion on epigenetics. And then then what I'm going to do is then circle back to each one of you for kind of some closing comments. But we've got a few minutes to talk about epigenetics, Meryl. So if you want to start that.
Okay, well, let me preface what I'm saying by saying I'm a public health nurse. I'm not an epigenetics specialist, but I like to read. I'm a little bit of a nerd, right? So one of the things that's really important to consider and keep in mind is that we have we have genetics, right? And we all have heard about those all through high school, right? Probably most of the people on this call remember those lessons in high school and in college. But life also throws curves, and our body is able to respond. Our genetics can respond, and genes can turn on and turn off as needed in some cases to make sure that we're adapting and we stay alive. That's basically what it is. Back, I don't know, I want to say it was maybe in the 2000s, maybe anyone else here can correct my dates. There was a study done on rats where a pregnant female rat, I believe it was given, exposed to the smell of cherry blossoms, I believe it was, and then exposed to an electric shock. Every time the cherry blossom smell came on, there was an electric shock that they were exposed to for things, right? Over time, needless to say, every time the cherry blossom smell came into their area, they would get very nervous because they anticipated this shock, right? 2 generations later, the baby rats, the rat pups or rat kits, whatever we're going to call them, would have the same reaction at the exposure to cherry blossom scent. That is a type of epigenetic response where you have that, it's almost like a cultural trauma, you know, and the grandma experienced it, and now the grandchild is experiencing that same stress response just from the smell. What I was referring to earlier was in neighborhoods where there's high chaos and there's a lot of violence, or there's loss, or there's not enough food, or there's just, you know, those sorts of very negative, what we call those adverse childhood experiences. It affects the body. It affects the body of anybody living in it, and can actually affect the next generations. And some of those effects are, you know, how we comfort ourselves, whether we're holding on to calories, whether we're able to burn the calories, how we manage with anxiety and depression and all those things. So, I mean, really, the way our society is designed, and I'm speaking specifically again now from a public health nurse point of view, the way our societies is designed, and the way we marginalize whole sections of our population, be that by the way you look, or the gender that you are or are not, or the height that you are or are not, or the, you know, the color of your skin, whatever it is, has these long-term cultural and generational impacts on our health.
Very good. Dr. Ettinger, Tim Marie?
Is this a chance to wrap up, you said?
No, go ahead and comment on epigenetics, and then we'll do the wrap up in a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's again, the epigenetics are genes that are turned on or turned off because of our environment, but it's our environment that's changed so much. Like in this tsunami of calories, the genes that are being turned on are not serving us. It's as if someone were swimming in a tsunami, a city that was being flooded by a tsunami and didn't have gills pop out and flippers pop out, that they could survive that tsunami flooding a city. We have a tsunami of calories flooding our cities and our countryside, and we just don't have the right genes to adapt to that on a such a small time scale. So unfortunately, this is the situation we're in. And again, what I like about the plant-based diet is that it changes the environment. All of a sudden, it creates scarcity again, that there's whole restaurants I'm not going to eat at, there's whole aisles of the supermarket I'm not going to eat at, whole classes of foods I'm not going to eat, and I have scarcity once again in my environment, and hopefully that satisfies my genes and my epigenes and keeps me healthy.
We also have good research that links gestational diabetes and maternal weight gain to infant offspring issues with weight. So we're programming, and I have seen some studies too that looked at like 7 generations, Meryl, like going through, and it's like 7 generations. That is just mind blowing. But we can do something now with that. And I think the best, for me, I believe the best message, and I started this very first day of class, every single class that I taught for Nutrition 300 for all those years, I started with Dean Ornish's research that basically said you can turn cancer on and off, right? The prostate cancer with lifestyle. And those genes, those were gentlemen who had the cancer, not just someone who is at risk. And we could actually see genes change. And so, because I do feel like a lot of people come with this family history of disease heavy backpack. And they just feel like, and that's perpetuated by the physicians as well as all the healthcare practitioners. So, oh, your mom had diabetes, oh, and your dad, and then you just start painting this picture of, well, yeah, you're at high risk, instead of saying, okay, this is a wonderful opportunity to break the cycle. I can't tell you how many times I wrote that. You are going to be the one, speaking to my student, you can break this cycle, and giving them hope rather than a destiny of disease, because then it's very easy to jump on the horrendous word choice of might as well. When you get to that point, might as well, then, you think, holy moly, we can't go there. So I like to think about the epigenetics piece as the opportunity, because we have that opportunity.
Excellent. Yeah. For me, whenever I think of epigenetics, the first voice that pops into my mind is Dr. Colin Campbell talking about turning on and turning off cancer. I just hear him saying that in my mind. And that concept, even as a physician, was, 20 years ago, I was like, your genes are your genes. And as you said, Timmerie, people today, I see them in the office, they have this or that, and they'll say, well, my mom had that, my dad had that, my grandmother had diabetes, so I'm going to get diabetes too. And when I tell them that, your lifestyle can influence that, they're like, what? Are you serious? So yeah, it's really a huge and very interesting area of medicine, and I love reading about it. And I think, as you all have been talking tonight, the word microbiome came up a lot, and I'm kind of thinking maybe a future topic, Natasha, Renee, Allison, we need to have a CNS spotlight on health and talk about the microbiome and how it influences disease. That's a huge area. So we're going to take about a minute and a half each. We're going to run just past the hour just a bit, but a minute and a half or so each. So yeah, kind of scale it down. I'm sorry. We'll start with Meryl, Timmerie, and then Dr. Ettinger. You'll go last, okay?
Okay, I think I have more than a minute and a half, but I'll follow the rule. Okay, so two things I've thought of most recently, actually three. One is we could make a difference with this. We absolutely can. We have to keep it front and center and make it important. Just like when it was time for us to really make a difference with tobacco, what did we do? We took it out of the public eye, right? It was no longer allowed to be advertised. It didn't show up in movies like it was going. It wasn't on TV. Doctors weren't sitting in their office smoking, and we banned it from hospital campuses, banned it from school campuses. We made it a thing, right? We are extremely ingenious, highly, creative people. We can figure this out. It's not hard. Two things that would make a difference with that would be the upcoming change in the dietary guidelines for Americans. If they would stop supporting Pop-Tarts for breakfast in school lunches, stop supporting corn dogs and pepperoni pizza and more pizza, and then some cheese on top of that and some sugary cereals and all that. They could stop all that. That would be an amazing thing, because those dietary guidelines influence all other areas where food is provided by the federal government. The other one is the Farm Bill that's coming up. That one needs to be changed as well. That has a lot to do with where our government puts our tax dollars and what area of the food complex is being supported. So right now, our dietary guideline plate says 50% of our plate should be fruits and vegetables, but something like 4% of the support, the financial support, goes to fruit and vegetable farmers. If we could get that aligned, that would make a big difference. That's probably the most I can say about that. Just make it important that children stay healthy. They don't need to grow up with diabetes and high blood pressure and all of this anxiety, depression, oppositional defiant disorders. It's so extra. Start them on a whole food, plant-based, healthy diet, healthy vegan diet. Even if you want to have a little bit of meat, okay. Not everybody's going to go all in 100% plant-based. Okay, I get it. but the more fruits, vegetables, phytonutrients we can get in our kids, the better off we'll all be.
Excellent. Thank you, Meryl.
To jump right into that one, to take those fruits and vegetables and take those kids and bring them in the kitchen, like we talked about. Every little tiny interaction counts, and every single person is a role model, whether they want to be or not. There are a lot of grandparents with missed opportunities to bring those kids into the kitchen, to show them, to basically, if they don't know how to cook, learn with them. It's not, we need to make it simple, but we also need to make it approachable. I believe one of the changes that has helped in the WIC program, because we actually have seen a decrease in childhood obesity rates, is the fact that we give benefits in money, but has to be spent on fruits and vegetables, fresh, frozen, or canned. That's it. There are very specific guidance. And in addition to whole grains and legumes, called out specifically beans and peas and lentils and even soy milk. So there are some changes that are happening there, but we have to actually get the kids making those recipes. And everybody likes to watch cooking shows and get involved. And so to make it fun, but that role model piece is huge. And the other piece about the role model is we have to be honest with the kids. And in that meaning, we have mixed feelings. Like Dr. Ettinger described, those treats are sweet. They smell good. They taste good. A Cinnabon smells great in the mall. But I can walk right by, breathe it in, and keep on walking. And I can just feel, part of that experience, right, without actually consuming it. But to say, yes, it's not that all of a sudden when you eat plant-based, you never want to eat a treat again. It's that idea that you have mixed feelings. Yes, I would like to eat that, but I also have health goals because I see what the thorns are of those. And so to really talk about that. And I really want families. And the other little piece about the cooking is when you're cooking plant-based, it's much safer. Food safety is not fun with raw animal products and eggs, not good with kids. So this is a really safe way for them to be able to cook together. But I want families to think about what would make it easier. Where is the friction? Instead of making everything so hard and you have to go full bore, which, Meryl was speaking about, any movement towards more plants is going to be helpful. So where's that friction? Is it when you don't have the vegetables cut up in the fridge? Is it when you haven't made a pot of rice or a pot of soup or a pot of beans for the week? Or, what is the situation? Because if you can find those little areas, instead of pushing so hard, maybe just taking some of the friction away, will make that momentum start to roll.
Thank you, Tim Marie. Dr. Ettinger, you get the final word.
Final word. So when I did my general pediatric residency at the turn of the century, so long ago, I had a continuity clinic teacher who was a beloved pediatrician in the community. And he taught me much wisdom. But one thing that I disagreed with is he wouldn't bring up weight in the visits with the families, because he said he didn't have anything to offer them, really. Like, why bring it up if I can't really help them? And that was kind of a frustrating situation for him and for many pediatricians, I think. And especially lately with social media, I've spoken to a lot of pediatricians who are afraid to bring it up also, because then they could get a review online that they fat shamed a child and their practice could be closed. So it was becoming very difficult to even bring up this topic. And so I'm very happy that, and I hope one of the results of this clinical practice guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatrics is that it gives the pediatricians the confidence and the skills, because there is a talk in there, discussion in there about approaching this sensitive topic with families, motivational interviewing, things like that, seeing about their willingness to change things. And now they do have options. They have medicines and surgery, yes, but they also have been encouraged to get children into programs, to reach out to whether it's a registered dietitian, nutritionist, other kind of subspecialty programs, that hopefully that pediatricians are now a good resource and will gain confidence in addressing this problem, which, as you said at the start, is one of the most common health problems, and the pediatricians weren't even talking about it. So I hope that is one benefit. We're having conversations like this, and that other conversations happen in clinic rooms around the country.
Excellent. Excellent. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time and your wisdom tonight as you shared with us. I know we left a lot of things untouched, but we used an hour, and we could use probably another hour. But in fairness to everyone, we're going to switch over to question and answer. But before we do that, I just want to mention that Meryl Fury, you can find her at the Plant-Based Nutrition Movement, her website, PBNM, that's PBN as in Nancy, M as in Michael.org, or you can Google 6 Million Seeds Child Nutrition Project. They also have a podcast. So, and I had the privilege of being on that a while back. So that's how you can find Meryl. You can find Timmerie at thenutritionprofessor.com. Encourage you to go see what resources she have there. And for Dr. Ettinger, just Google Dr. Herbivore and you'll find him. So
Spelled out, doctor spelled out.
Doctor spelled out, DOCTOR, Herbivore. Okay, yes, that's correct. Thank you. All right. Renee, what do you have for us?
We have a bunch of questions, which is good. So we'll start with a couple and see where that, we'll see how long we have. But one great question. So how do we influence our schools to focus on healthy diet choices for our children, especially when schools are receiving funding from the government in the form of subsidized, dairy and meats?
So that's what I touched on earlier. Those dietary guidelines for Americans are critical for that, right? Short of that, they re-up those every 5 years. And we're in conversations now with our legislators and the USDA to make those changes. But short of that, and if those guidelines don't change, which we wouldn't be super surprised if they didn't change, you can work on the school environment. So everything else that happens in the school, like Timmerie said before, everything is an opportunity for an education, right? So you can look at the vending machines that are in the school. You can look at the treats that people bring in for birthdays. You can ask the teacher if she's giving candies as rewards, those kind of things. You can look at the, what are the booster clubs selling for your sports events? What's going on for the fundraisers? Those are all ways that you can have a direct and immediate impact on the school environment. And then you might want to think about sending your child's lunch to school with them because what's getting sold in schools is pretty poor quality in a lot of cases.
And the Humane Society for years has done some chef training programs that they involve school districts as well as hospital organizations and lots of different other large entities. And their goal is to get the animal products out. But in the meanwhile, while they're doing that, they may not always have the most healthful ingredients, but they're all plant-based. And so they open the mind of the school nutrition services because they're working in the same limited amount of subsidy, that same however many cents you get per meal. They're very, very aware of that. And so they've done amazing work at college campuses, but also in large school districts. And they don't charge for the training. They bring chefs out. It's phenomenal what they are doing as well. And PCRM has a whole program.
Yeah, the PCRM links to a website called Universal Meals, which are plant-based and don't have 9 of the top allergens that affect kids and people. And the recipes are in the small size 4 to 6 servings or a large size of 50 servings. And they also, so you can bring them recipes to your school and say, look at these great recipes. And they also have a category of thrifty recipes where the ingredients are inexpensive. So if you can help them with their school budget, they might appreciate that too.
Nice, yeah.
Awesome. So we have another question also about, there's a concern for, potentially creating an eating disorder in obese children when we start talking about diet and lifestyle changes and kind of going back to that feeling of, being fat shamed. How do you guys approach that subject with the children to really make sure that this is, an open and inclusive talk?
Yeah, the clinical practice guidelines go over that because that is a concern. And you certainly don't want to pressure someone and uncover such a problem. And the studies actually show that having conversations can actually reduce the risk of an eating disorder. There was one study where some at-risk, like tween girls, were see how much doing technique, meals, using lax or over exercising, things like that. And then they went through a nutrition program. And at the end, the rate of their unhealthy dieting techniques went in half. So showed less of a likelihood to develop an eating disorder. And then there's also this very well-used adolescent dieting scale, which measures 8 activities that a teen might be doing to diet. And the more of these activities that they're doing, the greater their risk of developing an eating disorder. And I looked at the list of 8, and only 2 would be consistent with the plant-based diet, that you would be eating lower calorie foods, but the rest, are not part of the plant-based diet. We encourage bountiful plant-based feasts with high fiber and high water content that are filling. So someone eating only scoring a few points on this adolescent dieting scale actually would not be at increased risk of an eating disorder. So that's reassuring too.
Excellent.
And I think taking the pressure off of the child, giving them the efficacy, working on that piece, but also saying it's an environmental piece that they can be part of creating. I would often say if we were all locked in an ice cream store, after a while, we would all start to crave this ice cream, even though you would have never thought about it if you were going about your daily habits. But if all of a sudden that was what you saw everywhere, then it would be kind of unreasonable not to expect someone to break down and say, my blood sugar is so low, I need that ice cream, even though they obviously don't. So that idea of including them in the process and saying, this is not a character flaw. This is not, you're not broken. This is the product of this environment where we've all been duped. We have been buying into this and then expecting to resist it. And so I think just letting them know and having that conversation that there is personal responsibility, but it's not for a child, it's not on their shoulders.
Perfect. Yeah, and another question that we had as well is, can you guys comment on whether it would be appropriate for using, a medication for weight loss? I know there are a lot of products out there now, injectables and things like that. And the new guidelines are suggesting, for our children, these may be something that could be used. Is there ever a moment where this would be, potentially appropriate to use in our children?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. So when I'm working with the family, I try to understand their locus of control. This is a concept of whether they think that their own destiny is determined by their own hard work or by powerful outside forces, and internal versus external locus of control. And there's no judgments on either of them. Some people are built some way about some problems. Some people are built some way about other problems. So someone who goes to the doctor and expects the doctor to fix their problem, yes, that would be inappropriate. If they go to the doctor starts talking about dietary changes, it's going to be a mismatch. They're not going to get any success out of that. They want the doctor to fix their problem. Again, not a judgment. When my car is broken down, I want to take my car to a mechanic. I want the mechanic to fix my car. I don't want the mechanic to teach me how to fix my own car. So that when you have someone who's looking for the fix, then yes, the medicines and the surgeries are safe and effective fixes according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, versus someone who wants to take kind of their destiny in their own hands and wants to figure out how to solve their own problem. that person would not benefit from the medicines or surgeries because they have no control over those situations that they want to control over. And that's the person that I'm looking for, that I can help guide and mentor and teach how to fix their own problems. And that's what's professionally satisfying to me right now. So yeah, if I can help someone figure out their locus of control, I can get them on the right path.
Perfect. And I'll leave it off with one more. This is more so a statement, not so much a question, but I think it's good to kind of leave us off and comment on. So someone wrote in the chat, throughout time, there have been sedentary children, readers, drawers, children that, are playing with action figures and dolls, but obesity wasn't the problem that it is today. Do you think that the elephant in the room is processed animal-centered foods on this?
Short answer, yes. And our environment, that we target our children, we market to them relentlessly, that the foods that we are selling, we sell in the classrooms, we sell all the time. Yeah. And then the other things, the things we talked about, epigenetics, the way the body responds to our situations and our lifestyle.
It's the nonstop snack bar. There's no even meals. A lot of my the clients that come in say, well, they hardly eat anything for dinner. And then you find out, well, they've been eating all afternoon. It's one thing after another. And so that just, we don't have that anymore. It's get up and grab a bag of this and grab a bag of that. And because when I had mentioned those disappearing calories, you're not going to feel it. You're not going to remember if you had 2 handfuls or 4 handfuls or 5 handfuls of chips, and it's not going to register. So those, and especially because, when you read about how much exercise it takes to burn off, a certain number of calories, and you think there's no way they're going to catch up. So that constant eating. And another piece of the sleep is, if you don't get to bed early enough, then they're eating at night. And then that whole eating at night changes the whole situation in the gut microbiome, as well as other negative consequences. So with the way the body handles glucose and everything else. So yeah, there's some things that we can set, some parameters. And I love that Dr. Ettinger had said, it makes it easy when you make the answers clear. So it's so easy for me to say, I don't consume animal products, rather than, well, it's Wednesday, I did work out today, I only had half a piece of cheese yesterday. So I'm faced with all of these decisions over and over. And there's decision fatigue, especially in a stressed environment where you're worried about a lot of things. The last thing you need to do is have to make the decision 100 times whether you should eat this or that, when you know that, it's probably not going to support your health. So one thing I want to tell everybody is, you say no once at the grocery store, or you say no 1,000 times at home until you say yes. And that's, it's making it easier for yourself or harder. But there's definitely truth to that.
Dr. Ettinger, do you have a final word for us on Renee's comment?
Yeah, I think Tina Marie made a good point. Is the child sitting there coloring while they're snacking, or are they so engrossed in the coloring that that's all they're doing?
Yeah. Well, once again, panelists, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, lots of interesting ideas that were tossed around tonight. Again, I wish we had another hour to just, focus on some other things as well, but I think we covered a lot of area, and I appreciate so much your time. And for those of you that were joining us via Zoom, we're so glad that you came to the first Spotlight on Health with CNS, sponsored by the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. And please watch your inbox and watch the website, because we're going to have more of these on varying topics in the future. It's going to be a lot of fun, so stay tuned. And thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you to all. And just to let you all know, you will receive the replay link probably on Friday. And then following that, after a few weeks, the recording will be available on the CNS YouTube channel as well, so that you can share it with your friends and family. So thank you to all who attended this evening and for your incredible comments. The chat was very active with many people supporting, helping one another, providing excellent ideas and resources. So I think this was a good time by all. Thank you and have a wonderful evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are. Take care, everyone.